Hello, 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 everyone. Happy Friday. We made it through the first week of March. I almost said February. Oh my God.
Yes, Women's Month.
So, I know. Thank God it's March. Oof, Lord, February was something else. I'm so excited because we have the multi-talented, multi-hyphenated Amarachi in the building, in the Zoom, I should say. So I'm super excited. She's coming to us live from Ghana. Yes, Aspen already knows the drill. drop in your location in the chat. I'd love to know where people are tuning in from. So hey, Aspen in LA. And thank you so much, Lightroom, for helping make this possible. Hey, Tiffany in Baltimore, Crystal in Philly. I love it. I love it. I'm just going to give it a sec for allow folks to join the Zoom. And yes. Okay, and I'm going to make my screen perfecto. May in Pittsburgh, welcome, welcome, y'all. Adrian, Pittsburgh, I love it. Tampa in the house again, love it. So I'm gonna read Amarachi's very humble bio to you all today because I know she has more that she could be saying about herself, but this is very humble. So Amarachi is a Nigerian-American self-taught photographer, filmmaker, writer, and speaker who was previously based in Tokyo, Japan. Currently, she is in Ghana. She is also the founder of Melanin Unscripted, a platform aimed to dismantle stereotypes and blur the racial lines by exposing complex identities and cultures around the world. Under her platform, she has produced and directed films like Black in Tokyo that I remember, I think that was one of my first introductions to you, actually, because I remember when super viral and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And it's a groundbreaking short documentary that exposed the Black experience of living in Tokyo, Japan, and curated events in Lagos, Nigeria, and New York at spaces like the ICP Museum under the International Center of Photography. With a background in international communications, she has worked with a number of brands and companies in Lagos and elsewhere. And again, she's currently in Ghana, one of her many pit stops I am imagining for the year. And as a writer and visual artist, Amarachi has dedicated herself to telling unique stories that bring identity and culture to light. Her work has been featured on platforms like HuffPost, CNN Africa, Black Enterprise, The Fader, High Society, and so much more. And she has done, campaigns for brands like Adidas. She was the first woman of African descent on the Adidas Tokyo page. And her passion for giving back has always also allowed her to work on projects with London-based women's rights groups like Equality Now, and also as a program ambassador for D&AD, New Blood Shift. So thank you so much, Amarachi, and again, for your very humble bio. I'm so excited to have you join us. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add that I probably left out from your bio.
Well, one, thank you so much, Polly, for having me. And, shout out to you for creating this incredible platform to bring so many amazing people together. Shout out to everybody in the audience. I'm excited to rock with you today. I would say, for the most part, the bio encompasses the idea that I'm a 360 creative, definitely multi-hyphenate in the sense that I try not to limit my creativity. And I realized very early that, I could do many different things, hence why I created an agency, because I kind of felt like, wait, I'm kind of an agency in myself. So ultimately, I think that kind of sums it up that, I started really with writing, and that kind of also has just led me as well into visual artistry, which is my main focus now. But I also consider myself a creative executive, running my own company as a CEO and chief visionary officer, as well as working with other brands like Polly mentioned. Some of my favorite collaborations with brands have been like a short film that I did with Nike, for example, as well as doing projects with like Sony Music, where I got to do the US marketing for African artists, people like David O for his like platinum selling album, A Good Time, as well as just really bringing visual perspectives into a marketing space, and just storytelling as a whole. So Polly, thank you again for the introduction, and yeah, let's get into it.
Amazing. Thank you. So you're saying you actually started with writing.
Yes. So I guess like when I was younger, I was really into poetry because I realized early like I needed a vessel for self-expression. And so poetry was kind of a space where, you know, I could communicate certain things, but at the same time, it was like visualizing my experience through my words. But then that kind of led me into, in general, I would really thank my grandfather for introducing me to photography and the importance of documenting memories. And so really from poetry being a vessel for self-expression, and also communication led into storytelling that I would say really started from being young and being Nigerian American. I was raised for the first 3 years of my life, born in the US and raised for the first 3 years of my life, 3.5 years in Nigeria. And so for the first 4 years, like I was also transitioning because, you know, as much as I was American, I was very much so Nigerian. And so, you know, I would get people asking me questions about where I came from. And I realized kind of early, especially like, you know, first, second grade, like, oh, like what's the best way to show people? Because what's been depicted in media and what it looks like growing up in like West Africa isn't really my truth. And so that led me into like going back home, taking photos and really bringing those photos to my class to show them like, hey, this is actually how I live. My house in Nigeria is actually way bigger than my house in America, but like
Listen,
that's not
I
what they're showing you
remember.
on
I
TV.
remember. I'm like, sometimes I'm still like, listen, why are we here?
Exactly. So what better ways to show people than photos and imagery? I think that's one of the most powerful tools for communication. So that's kind of how my love for writing and visual arts started.
That is so beautiful. And so when you started, I mean, your grandfather introduced you because I know for myself, I guess like I found it by accident in a sense. And, you know, in our culture, African culture at large, there's that you know that saying that we should be doctors, engineers, lawyers, all of that, right? But you're saying your family actually, pushed you to start this.
I would say like my family allowed me to have the space to like learn and like learn about myself. I guess like because my grandfather was always documenting, that was like an introduction to like documentation and the
Mhm.
importance of that because, you know, I actually have, I'm wondering if I should even show you guys, but like I have a book where my grandparents have a 25th anniversary and they have photos from like 1930s, you know what I'm saying?
Oh,
Like, and 1940s and 50s, where it's like thinking about just the essence of like just even African history. A lot of it hasn't been properly documented. So I came from a family of historians, I would say, who are people that made sure to like maintain their history and keep it, and then really from that, like I would say like me being so passionate and driven, like my 14th birthday, like I like begged and pleaded, you know, for like my dad to help me fund like a camera. And he ultimately was like, you know, if this is something that you want to do and like you're willing to work, you know, inside and outside of the classroom and still maintain this, like, you know, this is something I'd be willing to support. And so I would say like that investment early really transformed everything for me because I was able to document in ways that I wasn't able to before. And like I even started doing like photo shoots for friends. And so like I always check my privilege because I was in a space, especially in an African household, that usually does not support entrepreneurship or like
right.
creative ventures. I definitely had parents that at least gave me the initiation that allowed me to explore it, but I had to take it very seriously and show them like I was passionate about it. Cause like by, you know, high school, I was already doing photo shoots and getting paid from being able to do photo shoots. Whereas like in college, I did probably in my 4 years, I probably did about 7 internships, which is a lot, you know, for like for like someone in college. So like I knew very early that if I'm gonna take this creative path seriously, I got to show them that it's all in or nothing. So it kind of started with, you know, my family giving me the space to be creative, but then it was followed by me having the passion and the drive to take it to the next level.
That is incredible. And there were so many parts within that. So you said in high school you were already starting getting paid. Where is it like, you know, like friends and family, like grad photos? What kind of like shoots were you doing? And then how did you actually like elevate to now where you're doing like campaigns for Nike? And not even just campaigns for Nike, but also like starting in the campaign as well, to be clear.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess like to take it back, doing the shoots, like I think like my friends, a lot of my friends are music artists, and I was always around like artists and creatives growing up. And one of my friends were, they were kind of doing like a creative collective, and they were like, oh, like we need to do this shoot. And it started with, we'll pay you $10 each, right? For some headshots and photos. But it was like 7 people. So I was like, okay, $70 for like 3 hours of shooting, like this isn't terrible. Like, so it kind of started with people seeing my work. I was taking photos of friends, but like the way I wanted to always depict them was like in this powerful light. I love taking images of people that make them like look and feel empowered, because to me that's important. And so it kind of started out with that. And then I think pretty early into my college career, I like I found this new passion specifically for video, because it really started, like I said, from like music, but also I was into fashion as well. I was a blogger, so like documenting myself. But then I was like, wow, like as much as I love photography in this space, I really want to explore film making. And it started with, okay, like my friends, they all have these incredible stories, like, and who is documenting them? And so that kind of initiated the concept of Melanin Unscripted, because I felt like what I'd been seeing on TV of depictions of people that look like me or people that look like my peers were not the depictions that reflected me. Like at that time, it was like Love and Hip Hop, Bad Girls Club, and, you know, Flavor of Love. And as much as like, you know, those were entertaining, I was like, this cannot be the only depictions of Black women in a video format, in film and TV. And so I was like, you know what, if I want to be the change, I have to walk in that space and document the stories that I ultimately want to tell. And so ultimately that kind of led, I guess this document is actually just a great way of communicating, um you know, Melanin Unscripted. So that led into me creating Melanin Unscripted, because I wanted to tell the unscripted and real life perspectives of people around the world. Because even if you look at this melanin map, for example, the melanin map that Polly just showed on the screen, like you look at Australia is very dark, because naturally the Aboriginal and the natives from Australia are dark. But why do we only see a specific perception of what Australia is based on today? Why are we not given the context? And so looking at this melanin map, I was like, wow, we're actually more diverse than we think we are. But how can we tell those stories in an unscripted light? And so going from photos and taking photos of my friends, of myself, went into creating film and videos and documentaries, which one of the first documentaries I released was Black in Tokyo. So ultimately, Black in Tokyo, like Polly mentioned, was an introduction for a lot of people to my work, where I guess like I'm kind of like skipping, and we'll probably kind of come back a little bit, but like my sophomore year of college, I moved to Japan for was supposed to be a semester. And so what I had realized going to Japan is that like when I was doing the research, I saw no depictions of, you know, what it was going to be like for me as a young Black woman experiencing. The only thing that I saw was one girl who was a makeup enthusiast. I wouldn't even say makeup artist, but she was like a makeup YouTuber, and she was married to somebody who was in the military. And so she talked about her experience trying to find makeup products that fit her. So I realized, okay, so I might have difficulties with this, but there were so many gaps in what I could actually experience. And so I said, you know what? Like I had a class that I was taking at that time. This was the only creative class I took in my university career, because my actual study was international communications, but I chose to take a making documentaries class. And I convinced my team, I was the only Black person basically in the class, but I convinced my team, you know, like, guys, like this narrative has never been really explored in a visual light. We have an opportunity to make history and like also document these experiences. You guys have Black friends here, but do you know what they're experiencing? And ultimately, that led us into the process of creating the vision, then putting the team together. I would say, like, you know what happens in class projects. There's someone that sometimes does more of the work than others.
Right.
And so
I hate group projects.
Yeah, exactly. Group projects, like it's an experience we all deal with sometimes where we're passionate about something and like we have to get people to be more enthusiastic, but we end up finishing the project and it was good. Like you got an A on the project, but then I was like, wait, there's still so much that needs to be told. So for about 4 months later, I just kept filming and I ended up filming about, I would say 70 to 80% of the film myself with my own two hands. Cause I was like, I can't wait for anybody to do this. Like I have to do this myself. And so ultimately I ended up filming it about 70% after the class project. And then after that, I also ended up editing the film myself. And it took about almost a year for it to come out after I'd actually filmed it. But to me, it was worth the wait because the process is so important. And Polly, I guess like this is a newer project that is coming out. So this is actually the trailer, which is not what we're gonna see, but like this is kind of like a preview. But the trailer is ultimately gonna come out at the end of this month, Women's Month. Shout out to Polly for setting the tone for Women's Month. But ultimately, it's a new story called Women of Color in Japan. And yeah, Polly, go ahead and like show them the preview.
Yes, I'm so excited about this.
This is the checkers game where grandson and granddad will
This is
bond.
not it, y'all. It's an ad. Don't worry.
This is the kitchen where the new boyfriend
Skipping that ad.
Japan is very unlimited. There's so many possibilities here. You can do anything here.
But when you look at Japan, there's hardly even conversations about women, let alone like women of color. So I feel like there's so much more conversations that could happen in Japan that just aren't happening right now.
I definitely think being like a Black woman in Japan is like being like a unicorn almost. Like there's not many of us, and I know what I'm doing here. I know that I have to keep building, I have to keep creating, and I'm not gonna let anybody stop me from doing that.
Like for me, I'm like the half like mixed child. It was kind of weird because everybody was pretty much mixed with European, you know, just not African descent. There wasn't much representation, and I feel like I'm a perfect element to push that out in Japan.
Becoming the version of myself that I want to be, I feel like I can do that anywhere, but I also feel like experiences help that along. So for me to be the person that I, you know, really want to be, I have to have certain experiences in certain places and be uncomfortable and not know all the answers. And I don't know all the answers here. So I think that to keep growing, I have to keep being uncomfortable.
Japan, no one is gonna hand anything out to you. If you want something, you definitely need to go get it. More than get it, you need to like really, really keep seeking and really, really keep knocking doors down until one door falls down.
Listen, that is amazing. The brand is strong. I love the branding. I love it. That is incredible. Let me get out of that real quick. Okay, so talk to us about that. Oh my gosh. So is this like a spin-off in a sense?
Yeah, I guess, you know, what's so crazy. Like I actually looked at the analytics of Black in Tokyo for the first time this year, and I realized that it was 81% of men that watched the film, which was really shocking to me because, you know, we had like women represented in the voice of the project. And so I was like, wow, like it's funny because we had already been planning Women of Color in Japan, but it was just so perfect because I feel like more women need to see themselves reflected in different narratives. And, you know, really the inspiration behind it was like, okay, Black in Tokyo has a certain perspective, it's communicating, but beyond that, again, we need that cultural exchange. And part of that is making sure the voices of women are really heard. And so just kind of like the inspiration was like, hey, like women of color are having a very unique experience. You know, Uzochi is Nigerian American like me. Tiffany is half Jamaican, half Japanese, and you know, grew up between Jamaica and Japan. And you know, Ameya, who goes as Jane, is also somebody who's of Indian descent, but like was born and raised in Japan. And I was like, these experiences are not always translated. So it's important for us to tell those stories. And like, funny enough, is like, it was supposed to come out last year, but then the pandemic and all these things where I was like, initially a little bit like, damn, like I filmed this like a while ago now, but at the same time, this story still needs to be told. And like, while I can be very hard on myself and be like, okay, well, you know, the level of visuals I'm now producing, you know, has transitioned, but at the end of the day, this story needs to be told. And like, that's the most important thing. And so really that was the inspiration behind it, is that, you know, women of color, their voices need to be heard, especially in underrepresented places like Japan. And that's kind of what inspired it.
I think there's so many lessons in this one, because I feel like as creatives, we often feel this pressure to when we do something to release it right away. Right? And then that might not even be done, it may not even be perfect. Like you are releasing it on your own time, on your own terms, right? And you're making sure that it is what you really wanted it to be, regardless of like, because I always feel like, especially, you know, with social, you know, if you don't post, you're not working, right? Like you don't, you know, it's just like that feeling of like you have to always be constantly posting or doing something to ensure that you're actually doing great work. But you're like, no, like that's not the case.
No.
Okay. I love that. Go ahead.
I mean, yo, everything you said, like it resonates, because like that's literally where it's at, where like I put so much pressure on myself previously to like produce. In Tokyo, I was shooting like twice a week for like, I mean, there was a period of at least 4 months. I was shooting twice a week and like constantly trying to document. But then I think as I kind of graduated college and I realized, wow, I'm getting into the space where this is like this isn't a hobby, this is a profession. I need to pace myself, because the quality that I want to produce needs to reflect the time that's taken in the process. And so I started to really just appreciate the process more. And like, you know, some people might be like, oh, like you take too, but it's like, no, like this is a time that I need to feel good about the work that I put out, because it's more important that I like it than everybody else like it, and then I may not like it. You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, that translates something that I'm trying to communicate to my audience. And with commissioned projects, I may not have that flexibility. So I really take the time. So like with Black in Tokyo, we shot it in the beginning of 2016 to like spring of 2016. It didn't come out to the end of 2017. Like I spent like months living in London at that point and editing it in London with a group of my friends who are also directors. And they like, I told them like, yo, like I want this to have 1 million views. Like I saw that in my head, in my forecast. And I was like, you know, I could easily put this on Vice, but like, why can't I create my own platform with this, you know? And so I could have easily been like, oh, Vice, give me some money in exchange for this. But then I wouldn't even have ownership over my own content anymore. So for me, it was patience, process, but ownership that were my priority. And with that priority, it needed time. And so with that, like I put so much love and energy into the edit. I put a lot of love and energy into the release, and like I did the PR myself and got it on over 50 publications for Black in Tokyo. And so those publications included Huffington Post, it included Vogue, it included Black Enterprise, and all these platforms I previously wanted to see myself, but it was through my work that I was able to position myself in those spaces, and through giving my work time and really just giving it process. And so with women of color, you know, again, it was supposed to come out last Women's Month. So I'm having to release it a whole year later. And like, you know, that took a toll on me at first, because I was like, wow, like I want this out. But then, you know, me looking back, that same due diligence I gave Black in Tokyo, now Black in Tokyo sits at 1.5 million views. That's 1.5 million people that have been impacted, you know, and if I didn't give it the love it deserved, they may not see that through. And so for me, with the same intention for women of color, like I'm not putting pressure on myself, like, oh my gosh, these views, how many people are going to see? It's more so, how much love can I put? How can I clearly define this story and share it with the world for them to receive it in their own light? And like, how can I just give myself due diligence and like make sure these women are well represented? Because as a documentary filmmaker, you have to put so much intention into how you represent others, because this can reflect them for the rest of their life, you know? And so, you know, with that process, that's kind of like why I was like, you know what, it's okay because I'm taking my time. But I look at it right now, like I'm in this unique space because um, I would say over the last 2 months, I've done more commission projects quietly than I have in the last year of 2020. And I haven't really shared many of them, but they're some of the biggest clients that I've had before, but I haven't shared them because I'm giving myself that process and that time to enjoy the work. And when I share it, you know, it'll still translate. You know, it's, if you're creating work that's timeless, no matter when you share it, people are going to feel it. So focus on creating that timeless work rather than trying to chase a timeline or somebody else's agenda. Follow your own path and follow your own timeline, and it feels better, you know. So yeah, that's kind of like why I'm taking the time.
Oh my goodness. Again, so many, so many gems right there to unpack. So in the chat, so you know, there's a few comments about how, you know, Tokyo or Japan, or you know, just even in Asia, I guess abroad or whatever, there's a lot of anti-Blackness. So how did you even just like find these subjects? How did you even feel comfortable to even like do this? And then you also mentioned, you know, how you take so much care into consideration that, you know, these subjects, once it's out there, right? If it's a million views, it's a million people who are seeing them. You know, like how do you take into consideration, or how do they even take into consideration that, and that, you know, potential exposure, potential, you know, I don't want to say harm because I don't think they would be harmed, but you know, dealing with a subject like this.
So I would go back to like the first statement on like anti-Blackness. I would say like a lot of the times we see the depiction of like Asian representation of Black people in Asia, and a lot of the times it's coming from China. And so China and Japan are quite different in terms of like, it's like kind of like, let's say like Nigerians and like, let's say Kenyans, for example, they might have different approaches and different characteristics that are generally associated to them. And so I would say like in China, Chinese people tend to be a lot more expressive. And so like if they feel something, they're probably going to tell you. Whereas in Japan, you probably will rarely get someone like directly saying something racist unless they're very bold. A lot of the times it's internalized and very passive aggressive, you know. And so I would say that Japan's a lot more nationalistic than they are racist. It's kind of like we're Japanese and you're other, rather than, oh, we're Japanese and you're Black. It's more so like you're not Japanese. And so like we're not going to treat you like you're Japanese in all cases sometimes, especially with older generations. But I would say that in the younger generation, they're definitely breaking some of those traits, specifically because they have more exposure through the internet and through people who have grown up in Japan, like Amaya and like Tiffany, who are of different descent that they may have had to be exposed to growing up. But if you live outside of Tokyo and you're in a more rural part of Japan, you may not get that exposure. And without exposure comes ignorance. But I would say that in my experience, like I've had way more racist encounters in the UK and probably even in definitely in America than I've had in Japan. A lot of the times it is passive situations where I'm sitting on a train and maybe they won't sit next to me, you know, because like for whatever reason they won't do that, especially with the older generation. But I would even say when I went to South Korea, I felt it a lot more than I felt it in Japan. So I would say Japan does try to kind of like be more considerate of different backgrounds, but in every place you have ignorance based on the lack of exposure and sometimes just based on the lack of compassion, you know, because some people know better and they don't do better. And I would say how I had to deal with that is keeping the right people around me and being able to have a community of people I could communicate with. And so thinking about the people that I documented, those were some of the people that Amiya, for example, reached out to me after I put out Black in Tokyo, and she had went to the school that I had just graduated from, the Japan campus of Temple University, where I went to school in Philly. And so basically, she introduced herself to me, and basically through hearing her story, I was like, I'm doing another documentary. I want you in it. And so really sometimes it's people reaching out to me, sometimes me reaching out to people, and through the film I get to know them, I get to spend time with them. And in terms of approaching that care, I would say that it's just like thinking of putting myself in their shoes, and like also, sharing them. Sometimes it is difficult to share the content with the subjects before, because they might give you feedback that completely disrupts your edit or your approach, and that can affect your process. But at the same time, I have to do that due diligence because they're going to be represented. So sending it to people ahead, making sure they're aware of what they've communicated, how they're going to be depicted. But at the same time, sometimes like I'll see them make a certain face and I'll be like, let's put B-roll on top of that, because I don't want that to be misinterpreted ultimately. So I'm like, you know what, like, let's find ways to just make sure to represent them well. But also as a documentary filmmaker, you put parts of yourself in every piece, because how you edit the dialogue, how you approach piecing it together, you just have to really, again, take that due diligence and understand the communication. And I would say like, just, documentary is a powerful communication tool because it's real life, it's unscripted. This is the real experiences being documented in real time. So understanding that, again, just taking the time to process and the care is how I would say that I best approach it, but also making sure to understand the women I'm documenting. If I don't understand them, if I haven't taken the time to do my research, I'm documenting them from my own lens rather than understanding what lens they're coming from. And I would say that even in photography, it's in that same light. You're documenting somebody. Sometimes you may not get to know them before the shoot, but like, having a communication with them, understanding what is their essence, what is the vibration that's being translated to you, and how can I depict that in the image in the best way. So that's kind of like how I would approach it and how I would recommend other people approaching it, whether it's still or it's film.
Amazing. Amazing. So when you made your transition from photo to film, like, I guess what was the hardest part, and what advice would you have for anyone who wants to actually make that transition?
Well, one, with filmmaking, you have to be patient. Like Women of Color, I filmed this towards the end of 2018. It's 2021. That's when it's coming out. For some people, they could never wait that long to put out one of their favorite images. But like I would say, it forced me, especially with documentary, because it needs that time. It just forced me to be patient. So, I would say that was the biggest transition, because like if I have a concept for a photo and like I can bring the right people together within a few weeks, that photo can be out a day later from that shoot if I take the time to edit it. Of course, that depends on someone's process, but that was really the biggest transition. And then I went to a space after putting out Black in Tokyo. I was like, filmmaking takes way too long. I'm just gonna start taking photos again. So if you can see, between 2018 and early 2019, I was really focused on images. So looking into this photography, these are images that I took in Tokyo. The client was actually Beats Japan, and these are two major artists in Japan, JP the Wavy and Komai. Komai is kind of like the Bjork of Tokyo, and like I would say JP is a rapper, and so ultimately, like, it was kind of telling their story. But one thing that was really important to me was the vibrance of Tokyo being represented, but also just considering my style. I like color, and you see color and really culture in every part of my image. That's a theory that I'm developing just through my work in general, is color and culture. And I actually did an Apple talk on that. So you guys go check it out, as some of these images are from that talk. So this is Smino. Smino is one of my homies and somebody that I documented while he was in Japan as well. And so like you see on the left side, you see this Japanese salaryman, and you see Smino. They almost have the same position in the walk, but they're having completely two different experiences. And so it was in that moment, it was like, how can I capture that essence and that energy of difference, but also realizing how different are we as humans? We have bones, we have limbs, and we're going in these similar paths sometimes, but based on different experiences. And so that was something that I wanted to really visualize there. And so what I would say with photography, one of the difficult things when initially being kind of this like blogger, fashion documentation space to going into filmmaking that was documentary focused, but then transitioning into photography that was really like commercial at times. But like, for example, those photos I shot as, were for High Snobiety. So it was for like a fashion culture magazine, but at the same time, I wanted to keep that documentary essence of the image. But at the same time, you see his style represented, you see his personal style and his personal energy. And so for me, some of that difficulty was like between documenting the real essence of people, but also trying to please a client, because you want the style to also represent where the image is going to be, but you want to not lose the tone and the voice of the subject. And so it was really kind of battling that. And so finding balance also in that. And so that's kind of like was one of the biggest processes. And so the next photos you see are photos I shot of the Nobel Peace Prize winner Malala. And so it was really dope because like her team saw Black in Tokyo, and they definitely seem to have very attention to detail when selecting the people that document Malala. They really try to have diverse representation because they could have easily found a creative agency in Tokyo with mainly Japanese people to document Malala in Japan, but they chose to touch base with me because they knew that I was going to bring a different feel to the table and different energy. And I ultimately, actually, Jane Amaya, who you see in Women of Color, was like my assistant on the shoot because Jane is also a photographer. And then I had my friend Twelly, who's Kenyan, who's actually from Kenya, from Nairobi, who's been living in Japan for about 10 years. He was the DOP. And so we basically just documented Malala. And we had a very diverse group, as mentioned, documenting her. And so again, the essence of color, you see Malala's headscarf and you see in the background the taxi. It was very intentional where I was like, oh, I want to document this moment because I know this car is right here. But at the same time, I needed to document her essence anyways. But me seeing things through color and culture, that car is very depictive of Japanese culture and Japanese taxis. And so color was also depicted in the essence of the red. And so those are ways that I kind of consider how I approach imagery and documentation, and kind of like, again, what has just inspired my process. And I would say I'm still in a space even right now where I definitely like see myself one day like being able to like do incredible feature films, have my own TV show that I direct and that I'm a part of writing. But in the same light, I want to be able to say, hey, like, I want to document the cover of a major magazine and like me take those images, and finding that balance between film and photography and how, I take time for that can be difficult, but it's so important because again, as you see, even through these slides, I am a creative executive. This event that we did in Ghana was Sony Music's launch in Africa, in West Africa specifically. And so I curated that event. I brought the collaborators together for that event. I made sure the people on ground, that there were Ghanaian people documenting it, because it was important to have the people in that community also be a lens to the imagery and the experience of that event. And so like in many ways, again, me being multifaceted, like I'm a filmmaker, I'm a photographer, but at the same time, I'm a curator. I can have, for example, we did a event in Nigeria where my images were in the exhibition, but I curated the exhibition and I collaborated with the platform on that exhibition. So, and really that kind of started from being like, okay, I want to take photos for magazines, but most of the things that I want to document, some people don't want to write the article for. Am I going to wait to find the right writer so we can see these things visualized? Or am I going to take the initiative and say, you know what, I'm going to write that article and I'm going to take the photos? And that's how I got into the commercial photography space, was by me being the journalist, but also being the photographer and the photojournalist in those situations. And so like, one advice I would just give is like, if you see a space that is not being properly filled, fill that gap and position yourself and use the different skills that you have to do so. And so finding that balance between the worlds has been, okay, in this case, you may need photo and you may need writing, but in this case, you may need curating and you may need visuals and documentation. And I'm also in a space now where like, sometimes I'm not photographing the actual image. I also can position visual artists as a creative executive, because I may not always be the best person to document it, and being able to pull my ego away and say, hey, like for the David O shoot, I worked with Cove Motivation because I thought he was the best person to document that. But I could have easily taken those photos myself and justified it. But, you know, being a creative executive allows me to look at things from a wide perspective and know when I'm the best person for it or when I can put someone else in that space. Sorry, I know I'm saying a lot of things at once.
No, listen, this is your TED Talk. We're here. I love it. I love it. Like, listen, I'm just gonna shut up and let you speak, because I'm just like, I'm learning so much. I love it. I love how you call yourself a creative executive. I love that. And actual, I think I also saw you tweet at one point you were like a cultural engineer, right?
Yes. So like I've been really interested in tech recently, but just in general, because it's what we use every day. It's how we're communicating right now. Me in Ghana, and you know, you in Oklahoma, is through tech. And so just considering technology, I've kind of like, you know, been in a space where I'm like, okay, but how do we bring community, culture, and tech together? And how am I, like, if I look at my journey, I started as a digital nomad before I was in a space where I could be a real nomad and going to these spaces. So with engineering, I think of engineering and technology as going hand in hand, because you need to engineer that technology. But then I think of culture, and I think of the fact that technology, culture, and really just community come so hand in hand, because I have a 4C theory where ultimately it's the idea that, you know, you have culture and you have community and you have creativity, and those things need to come together for things to be impacted at a corporate level. But as a cultural engineer, I bring all of those tools together to ultimately help culture transcend through the work that I do. And so that's why I consider myself a cultural engineer and a creative executive.
I love it. Again, I literally like anything you said, I love, but I think that's brilliant. So I think my other questions for you, I think something you mentioned is once you actually had this project, so you ran it from idea to the process, you filmed it, and then it's getting it out there in the world. Because I feel like with, you know, with us, I love what you said about ownership. If like having that ownership, yeah, you could have had like Vice or whoever, it's perfect for them, have them take care of that, but you really wanted that ownership, and you were able to get it out there to over like 50 publications, and you were acting as your own PR, your own marketer, all of that. So what, like, you know, advice would you have for creatives who are also thinking about, you know, how do they get their personal projects out to the world? Do we just like tweet it and go, or do you have this whole plan that, you know, do you just like pitch these publications like before or after, like, you know, how do you even do that?
I would say like it definitely, the process varies based on the kind of project. For example, with Black in Tokyo, I pitched so I knew usually how I try to operate my releases as a trailer has time for people to process and have excitement. So with Black in Tokyo, I had the trailer come out about 10 days before the actual film. Luckily, we weren't in a pandemic at that time, and I actually screened the premiere at the International Center of Photography, ICP, in New York, which was such a big deal for me because ICP is like, is massive. So
Yes.
so I was very grateful. My friend Wesley gave me that space. Again, Wesley's someone I met in Japan. This is someone that saw me on Instagram and ultimately hit me up and was like, hey, I want to take a photo of you. So it started with him wanting to document me in Japan to like, okay, like ultimately I now have this space. And so considering it, I knew we had a really big opportunity at ICP. And I was like, so I can pitch it ahead. Ultimately, I looked at the variation of like, I want to have this digital experience because most people won't be able to go to the screenings in DC and New York. But at the same time, how can I make sure to amplify it? Because this is a story that hasn't been told before in this light. So this is something that people want to take. So how I thought of it was like, okay, who are the publications I want to pitch? Like I pitched so many places, from news outlets to cultural platforms to even fashion platforms like Vogue. And I didn't know exactly who would pick it up, but I looked at the writers that I was pitching to, and I thought, okay, do these writers have interest in documentaries? Do I have interest in Japan? Do they have interest in culture? And so I was very intentional about who I chose. And yet, me being Nigerian American, if I found a Nigerian American writer, I was very immediate of like, okay, they may understand from my culture's perspective where I'm coming from and may want to engage me off of that. But then the likelihood of every editor being from a similar background is not realistic. And so then I had to think about, how can I position these stories in a way that they know that I understand their writing format. So I was very intentional. Hey, I've seen you do this story and this story. I have a film coming out that I think may be of interest for you based on what you've already written. And because I took the time to really think about their work, how they fit in this wider story, a lot of people appreciated that. And because of that, picked up the story. And what I did is I put together a press release, and on separately, I put together a media kit, which basically allowed there to be a tool to have like a deck, like what I've been showing you, in this process. But at the same time, it had links to the assets. So if they picked it up, they could immediately post it and share it. Or if they wanted to do interview questions with me, they had a chance to understand the story. So you really have to put together your media kit and your marketing material. Because, for example, if a music artist is about to drop a song, they're not just going to put it out and not share it with other people that it's coming. They let their fans know that a music is coming, so they give the anticipation time. Then on top of that, they're intentional about where they place it. So if they may place it on the Fader or Billboard, or they may say, hey, this is hip hop focused, let's put it on Hot New Hip Hop, or let's put it on World Star. So they're thinking about where they're going to share it. If you're an African artist, you might think about OK Africa, or you might think about Native Magazine, Hamilton Rain. So you're intentional about where you're going to put it. And based on that, you put the materials together that are going to translate to that audience. And so if you don't have a media kit for yourself personally, I absolutely recommend that. You can't always update your website easily. You might have someone who's coding it for you, or like getting on Squarespace might be a process, but your media kit is something that you can have on Google Slides, and you can update it as soon as you have a new content. You can put it right there. And so sometimes, like, I'm not gonna lie to you, this is probably not, like, I haven't updated my site in like a very long time. I'm not even gonna say how long it is. I haven't updated my site in a long time, because I realized that a lot of the times I'm sharing my media kit. And so it's not as pressing. Now I'm in a space like, oh my gosh, like I need to update my site. Why has it taken this long? But like a media kit's a great tool if you don't have a website, or sometimes you don't have the access to making one yourself or the money to pay someone to do it, but you can make your own media kit. So I would absolutely recommend that, especially if you're telling a documentary-based story. I think for me, the things that have garnered the most attention in my career are my personal projects. So, things like Black in Tokyo, but then I even think of the film that I did with Alton Mason, Rise and Light. And those were things that like I took time to personally, but also like things that like translated like me as an artist the most. Because if someone asked me to take a photo today for Nike, thank God Nike gave me the ability to have creative freedom where I could even star in a film that I directed and I wrote. But initially, that's not always going to be the case. Like sometimes you have to fight for those positions, and you have to fight for like your vision to be translated. But ultimately, having the right pitch tools, having the right documents, being able to communicate your project well, especially if it's a personal project. You think about, let's say you want to document your relationship with you and your mother. You know what I'm saying? Like you have to translate the emotions of why you are inspired to do that. And someone's not just always going to read an email. Make it visual, show the photos, show the inspiration. I love looking at media kits that take me through their world. For example, I don't want to just read. Like we're in a fast-paced world, people are over-consumed. So I would say like have your media kit ready. If you don't have a website, have your website ready if you do have access to that. And make sure you're doing the research on where you want to see it placed, and doing research on the writers that you want to reach out to. You have to make sure that they are aligned with your vision just as much as your vision is aligned with the platform. So that's like my overall recommendation on just getting your work out there.
All right, y'all, we have some homework to do. I love it. If you have any questions for Amarachi, please drop it in the chat. We're almost out of time. It's crazy. I can't believe we're almost done with this conversation. So for you, I guess you've kind of already told us like what's next in a sense. Do you feel overwhelmed when you think about like all the things you want to accomplish, and like how do you even like begin? Because I already feel like you've accomplished a lot. But you're talking about you want to have your own TV show. Like, are we gonna see it on Netflix? Like, what's going on?
So, girl, yes, sometimes you do get overwhelmed and you have to find that balance. And so to me, just as I invest in my creative process, I invest in my self-care routine, like implementing things like meditation, journaling. I literally have like a habit tracker that I have on a platform called Notion, where basically I'll even show you guys if this shows up on the screen where, let me swap. So for example, I have a habit tracker here. It says 7 hours plus sleep. Did I pray? Did I meditate? Did I work out? Physical therapy, journaling. And as you can see, did I go outside? Did I read? And sometimes like I'm not gonna always be perfect at it. As you can see, there's certain things I miss throughout the week. But if I intentionalize it, and just like when I'm doing a project or working with a client, I got to be on a schedule and a regime. What are you doing to schedule your self-love, your self-care, and check in with yourself? You have to make that time for that, especially as a creative. My mind is being used so much, to execute these things. How do I decompress? How do I allow myself to process and like actually reflect on what I've done? And so, yeah, there are times I get overwhelmed. Like I literally just got off the set where I was directing and hosting a documentary here in Ghana that I've been working on, called African Creative Class. That's going to be basically about the creative class coming out of the continent. And like, it was 10 days of back-to-back filming. So like, I didn't get a chance to do my routine as much, but when I am off that project, I need to check in with myself. And so that's what I would say, like I use as a tool. Check out Notion if you don't have it. My whole life is on Notion because like, you have so much in your mind. What is your mirror? How can you reflect on everything you're doing and what you're working on? And so I would say creating that balance is necessary, and having the right people around me. Shout out to my team, the people who are on my team that make sure the boat is always moving, regardless, because I keep the right people around me. I have the right people on Team MU. We're able to pace ourselves and also create the right pace to get things done. And so that's kind of how I maintain my balance: self-care, keeping the right people around me, and also just being intentional and like giving myself time and space, because I can be so hard on myself sometimes. As someone that, people look at me and think, oh, you're young, you've accomplished a lot, but like I have a God dream, a vision in me that I still feel fulfilled to get out. And because of that, I got to stay tapped in with God. Shout out to God. Not everybody here may be spiritual, but I have to keep my spirit intact by keeping my prayer and my purpose in motion. And so because of that, I ask God for guidance and like also, give myself the pace to act out on that guidance. So that's how I keep my balance. And it's a work in progress, like it's not something that I have all figured out. But at the same time, if you do something, today, like there's this quote where basically if you started something today that you wanted to like two weeks ago, it's better to start today than still wait for another 2 weeks to start it. So start here, start now, and honor yourself in that process.
If y'all were looking for a sign to start something, you just got your sign. I love it. And I see it often because I see your like daily affirmation posts. I love it. I think it's beautiful. Thank you for that. I do have a question. Yes, someone needed that sign. So there's a question that was sent to me that said, ask, how did you become okay with being a multi-hyphenate? I sometimes feel that when I work on my film skills and other areas are diminishing. How do I get over that?
Everything is give and take. I will tell you that, like the last year and a half, I've been so focused on being a creative executive because I needed to have a space where I can create all these amazing ideas. I didn't want to have to wait for an agency to sign me. And I knew at that chapter in my life, it was important to honor myself as an executive. So I could create a platform where there might be somebody on this call that wants to be a visual artist and wants the right platform to work with, or the right production agency, or the right representative. I needed to create that space, not just only for myself, but also like people along the way where it could work. So I had to honor myself as an executive. And in that time, I was able to like get things like funds so that these personal projects that I have, I can fund it myself. In that time, I may not have been taking photos as much. And so I had to do give and take and balance. But now I can do photo projects and fund my own photo projects and not have to worry about, okay, this magazine has to give me the commission to do what I'm even passionate about, you know? So now I'm giving myself that space and time. So you have to know in each chapter what is needed of you for your grand vision. You know, there was a chapter I needed to be really heavy on my photography. There's a chapter I needed to be really focused on my filmmaking. And there was a chapter I needed to be really focused as a creative executive. And now I'm at this space where I'm like, okay, bringing everything together, because I took the time with each process to really honor myself in the process, understand what I'm doing, how the business works, but how the creative process works. And now I'm in a space where, okay, I can bring all these things together, but it's okay that in one chapter you're focused on one thing and you may not be able to focus on another thing as much. Just honor and take the time to process everything in the chapter that you are. And like maybe have a habit tracker to make sure, hey, I didn't honor myself as a photographer or a filmmaker or a writer in this week. Can I remember to work on those projects that also just bring that joy, happiness, and fulfillment out of me? So yeah, balance, give and take. Like you can't be perfect at everything at the same time. But at the same time, I had to allow myself to like know my power in each thing that I do, because I've had so many people tell me like, oh my gosh, Amara, if you just focused on one thing, like you'd be at the highest level in that one thing. And I'm just like, you know what, like there's some truth in that. You know, at the same time, there's also truth in me doing a lot of different things and doing it well. You know, like if God gave me that ability to do it, like I'm gonna allow myself to act on that. I'm not gonna listen to what everybody else is saying. I'm gonna honor my truth and my experience and my execution to do it. So I would definitely say like honor, like listen to that voice in your head that's calling you to do what you're meant to do. You might be doing something completely different, but that voice in your head is telling you, do this, do this. Honor that voice, because you may look 10 years from now and say, damn, I didn't get to do what I knew I was supposed to if I just took the time to just honor the voice in my head. That's the most important voice, because that's the voice you live with. So that's my advice, is just like give yourself time to process, but also like give yourself balance. You may not be perfect at one thing at all times, but it's a part of the process.
We got some amens in the chat. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Amen. Thank
Oh
you.
my goodness, that is just so beautiful. I think I might replay this once a month just to like remind myself I need to honor my truth. Like this is what she said last month, Polly. Why have you not done? Like I'm gonna definitely do that. Like thank you so much for that. Like I'm gonna say one more time. Any final questions? Drop it in the chat. Any final questions? Drop it in the chat. My final question to you would be, you know, being the founder, being a, you know, creative executive and all the things that you do, I guess, you know, what has, you know, being a founder taught you about yourself in this time? And, you know, how can we, you know, support you in all the things that you do? Because I feel like, you know, in my short time as a founder, like of a community and of a platform, it's like, okay, if you pour so much out, right? Who keeps pouring into you? You mentioned you have a, you know, that support system and all the things, right? But how do you, I kind of got it with the gist of the habit track and all of that, but I hope those like questions make sense.
Yeah, I mean, being a founder is very difficult, because if everything goes right, it's the team, right? But if everything goes wrong, it's you. Like you have to deal with those things a lot of the time and really take it on the head. But if I remember your or understand your question correctly, I would say that like I think it's just important to like learn the process. Being a founder means that I'm constantly learning. Like I'm always going to be a student of what I'm doing because the landscape is always changing. For example, COVID, a lot of how we were getting funding was through curating experiences and events, and boom, events are all gone. How do I pivot? And so it really taught me that you need to build on solid foundations, because at the end of the day, if you can be growing, but if your foundations aren't solid, it just takes one thing to knock you down. But ultimately, if you're taking the process, so for example, I was very reactive in my first few years at Melanin Unscripted, because like instead of being like, okay, let me be proactive, let me operate on offense, a lot of the times I was on defense. And so I learned in order to be on offense, I have to have strategy, but I also have to understand when that strategy may not happen. And I have to be in a position being able to pivot and also like have options at like how I can approach things or do things next. So as a founder, like I've put in systems in place. It's not just like, oh, put a payroll system. It's a creative system. Like if you're creating a deck and a pitch for a client, what does that look like? So that I'm not always the person that has to do it. There's someone on my team that understands the process because I've properly articulated those things so that I'm able to be in a space where I can hop out and pour into myself. Because also I think the hardest thing as a founder is distinguishing between what is Amarachi Nwosu and what is Melanin Unscripted. Because so many times at like Black in Tokyo, that was like a personal film project, but I made it an MU project. But then also understanding sometimes I'm gonna do something and it may not be MU. And that has to be okay. You know, like right now I'm speaking to you. This isn't a Melanin Unscripted project. This is me talking to you as a visual artist and a founder. And so being able to distinguish when it's Amara and when it's MU is important. And that's something that took time to understand. I would say that's something I really learned in 2020 because I was forced to learn it and distinguish. But I would say like making sure like I'm pouring into personal projects that may not be streamed on Melanin Unscripted, and that's okay. Let me take time to honor those projects. And when it's time to be a platform project, honor those too. So really understand your balance. Like I've had to create a personal plan, a personal 2021 plan and a MU 2021 plan so that I can I'm a visual person. You know, when I'm writing notes, I write it in bubbles, like because I know one thing leads to one thing leads to the next versus in a linear writing format because I know how I understand things. So creating a visual plan for myself that is for myself, honoring myself, that's different than what MU's project is, has been able to help me distinguish as a founder what is a personal project and what is a platform or a company-based project. And I would say those are the things that's helpful. And I would say I'm really learning that more than ever right now because finish, but like start to now. But like, yeah, like shout out to you and I hope you're well, taking care of yourself in these times.
You know.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so sorry.
No worries at all. I did for you.
Well, thank you so much again for your time, for your energy, for all the gems that you managed to drop within an hour. Like, I don't even know how, like, but you packed it all in there. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't know if you were able to say any last words that you want to leave us with.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, again, thank you so much, Polly, for having me a part of this and for the incredible work you're doing. You know, as a founder, you've been able to create a space and it's growing exponentially and more women are engaged. And I'm so proud of you. And, you know, I guess like as last words, I think it would just be like, continue to honor your truth. continue to listen to that voice in your head that's telling you to do something and disrupt your usual routine, a lot of the times you have to risk it for the biscuit. If you're not willing to take that risk, you're not going to see the fruits of your labor in the way that is necessary for your growth. And so, you know, like I always try to just say, like, allow your art to reflect your truth and to just understand your process and honor who you are as a person. And yeah, just like take that risk. Like, don't wait for anybody to validate who you are. Do it anyways. Do it when you're not fully secure. Do it when you feel uncomfortable doing it. Like, those are usually the times, like, you know, you're being called to do it the most. And like, you know, just continue to stay connected to your faith and what drives you. You know, if it's God, if it's your spirit, if it's the universe, whatever it is, stay tapped into those things, because that voice in your head is what calls you to create your art. And so, yeah, that is what I would leave with. If you guys have a chance, definitely check me out on Instagram, check out MU. We have a lot of amazing projects going to be dropping towards the end of this month. And, you know, we have a Women's Month highlight that happens every month, which actually, you know, just to give y'all a hint, Polly is a part of this year, and I'm super excited to be honoring incredible women doing amazing things. And if you guys want to get in touch with me, on my Instagram, there's my email. So feel free to, like, you know, share your name, share your details, share your work. If you have a question, ask. But, you know, thank you so much again for rocking with me, taking the time to tap into my constant talking, because sometimes I'm like, am I saying too much? But you know what? We're here.
You are perfect. thank you. I don't even know, like, honestly, truly, I don't even know where to begin. Thank you so much, truly, for your time. Everyone in the chat is saying thank you, and how amazing and inspiring you are, because you are a force to be reckoned with. And so thank you so much. I'm just gonna leave it at that, like, because I can even say thank you for another hour.
Yeah.
I could
No,
definitely.
I was like, how are we gonna get this done in an hour? But I think, like, we have some gems in here from both me and Polly sharing information. So I thank you so much again. Good luck with everybody on what you have in store. You know, this is a very hard period, especially as an artist. You know, we're dealing with a global pandemic, but even through that, again, you can accomplish the things that you believe are possible. Obviously do things safely, but like, execute that vision. It's yours. You know, God has given you this to see through. So see it through. And shout out to Polly again. And I'm looking forward to see all the amazing things Black Women Photo has in store. And yeah, guys, like, please have a blessed rest of your day.
And on that note, have a wonderful night, day, wherever you're at. And thank you all so much. Bye, everyone.
Yes. Take care, y'all. I'm actually going to check out what everyone's saying in this group chat.
I love
but
it.
yeah, take care, you guys.